We're also focusing on Australia Post today because there's an important discussion paper out and it does dictate what might happen to Australia Post in terms of what the future of Australia Post looks like. I'm happy to say that Communications Minister Michelle Rowland joins us live now after a pretty lengthy media conference there, so we appreciate that. First of all, straight off the bat, is Australia Post in financial trouble?
Well, Australia Post this year, Laura, will post its first loss since 2015. And this comes off the back of a serious decline in letter volumes. It's a situation that has not evolved overnight. And we know that in terms of letters, as they have been in decline, that has taken a substantial toll on Australia Post's financial situation. And meantime, whilst it does have an area of the business which is not subject to regulation, that is its parcels business, that business is subject to intense competition from international players, including ones that are building rival networks right here in Australia. So it's a situation we find ourselves in where the regulations governing Australia Post, some of your viewers may be shocked to learn, are around 25 years old. So that even predates by about 10 years the advent of the first iPhone. So in an increasingly digitised world, we need to ensure that Australia Post remains relevant and responsive to consumer needs, particularly the needs of small business and those in rural and regional Australia. That is the reason why we're putting out this consultation paper now, to kickstart a process of looking at what needs to be done with Australia Post to ensure that it remains financially viable, and that means that jobs and services are viable as well.
What about the universal service obligation? Is that something that you really want to look at? Does it, is it fit for purpose in 2023?
If you're referring, Laura, to the community service obligations that apply to Australia Post, we do have a situation where there are 5-day deliveries effectively for mail right across Australia. There are timeframes for the length in which they need to be delivered, and we know that they apply again to letters, and letters volumes have been declining. It is very pleasing to see that the workforce, through their unions and with Australia Post, have been working on types of delivery models that help make this more sustainable. But initially, I think we need to have a look at two things. Firstly, the fact, as I said, that letters are in decline, but also we want to make sure that people have jobs that are well-paying, that are relevant, and that reflect the growth in the organisation as well. So we see this process as a key driver of productivity. We want to be responsive, and we want Australia Post to be innovative. We know that around the world, where governments and state-sponsored postal organisations have failed to adapt, they find themselves in diabolical trouble, and that is of no service to their citizens. This government is determined that Australia Post should succeed. This is a long overdue review, and we want to be upfront and transparent with the Australian public, which is why we are issuing this, outlining some of the challenges that Australia Post faces, but also looking to the future. And I'm very pleased that in my initial consultations with small business and regional representation, they understand the importance of Australia Post to remain viable for their communities and their constituencies.
Long and the short of it, the cost of a stamp for a letter, is it going up, and is it going to be less frequent?
Well, we are making no decisions at this stage. This is purely a consultation process. And I would point out to viewers, some of whom might not be aware, that Australia Post goes through a process to increase the price of stamps, and that needs to be subject to regulatory approval. The price of a stamp actually went up by 10 cents in January. And we know, as the discussion paper points out, that that cost of a stamp is actually low by comparative standards and actually doesn't cover costs. So we are setting out these options. We want the public to have their say. We're not making any decisions, but all of this will be used as very important inputs to government policy and decision making around what we need to do to help make Australia Post sustainable.
Can I ask